In this video, we're going to take a look at trying to determine the sample size needed if our goal is to construct a confidence interval for either a population standard deviation or a population variance. So we may determine ahead of time, similar to a desired margin of error. Here, the margin of error is going to look like a percent of the standard deviation. If that is known, we can determine how large the sample should be before using it, using either a table or using technology. So, if we want to use technology, use StatDisk, then to determine the sample size to estimate a standard deviation, we will select Analysis, then we will choose Sample Size Determination, and then we will choose Estimating Standard Deviation. We will need to input two different values. So we will input the confidence level that we are going to use and the percent margin of error. We are going to enter this as given. We are not going to enter this as a decimal. So if it says we want to be within 50% of the population standard deviation, we would enter in 50. Not 0.5. If it says we want to be within 30% of the population standard deviation, we would enter in 30, not 0.3. If it says 5%, we would enter in 5, not 0.05. Right? So we enter in the percent margin of error as given, not as a decimal. All right, so let's take a look at an example. You want to estimate sigma, the population standard deviation, for the population of waiting times at McDonald's drive-up windows, and you want to be 95% confident that the sample standard deviation is within 20% of the population standard deviation. Right? So our confidence level that we are going to have here is 0.95, so a 95% confidence level. Our percent margin of error is going to be that 20%. And so we want to find the minimum sample size that's required. So we're going to go to StatDisk. Here in StatDisk, we are going to choose Analysis. We're trying to determine a sample size, so we're going to choose Sample Size Determination. We want to determine the sample size in order to estimate a standard deviation. We need to input two things. So we need to input the confidence level, that is as a decimal, and we need to input the percent margin of error. And so our percent margin of error is 20%. And so we enter it as given, not as a decimal. And so we have 95% confidence level and a 20% margin of error. Let's just check that again. 95% confidence level, 20% margin of error. And then we evaluate that. We're given two different answers. Here we want to estimate a standard deviation. And so the required sample size is 48. So we need 48. The minimum sample size is 48. Is this sample size practical? So could we observe 48 people waiting at a McDonald's drive-thru? Yes. Yes, 48 is practical. It is not unreasonably big. Or not unreasonably large. What if we happen to know that this population, the population of waiting times at that population was skewed to the left? How would that change your estimate? I don't know, what does that distribution, what impact would that have on constructing a confidence interval? So remember, for standard deviations, if we're trying to construct a confidence interval in order to estimate a standard deviation, the initial population has to be normally distributed, no matter what the sample size is. So if that population was skewed left, then the values we got are meaningless. Or they are worthless. So it has to be a normal distribution in order for this number that we came up with, in order for that to make sense. Here, even though 48 might seem like a small number, and you might say, oh, that's not large enough, we came up with that number using statistical methods. That number is generated using statistical methods. So that number should be fine, provided we have a normal distribution to begin with. All right, we will see you in the next video, where we're going to move into Chapter 8, and we're going to talk about hypothesis testing. We will see you then.